about our Native Hawaiian garden.
There you go.
Great. Welcome everybody to another Fundraising Friday. This week, our topic is maintaining sustainability through a recession. This topic really has been kind of circulating, things that we've been hearing from the groups that we work with, and just in the general public around what's going on economically and how it's affecting work in all sectors, but especially in the nonprofit sector. And here is an introduction to our team, which is ever expanding. We are hiring for 2 new positions as well, but these are folks who will be on calls with us throughout the process. I have my fearless first mate Polly with me today, who's helping me hold down some of this training. But you'll probably in other series see other folks jumping in and out as well. So who is Progressive Multiplier and what do we do? So our goal is to help organizations build a progressive movement of, by, and for everyday people. We do this by organizing and leveraging funding to create on-ramps for progressive organizations to start, strengthen, or scale individual giving and earned revenue programs. Through both an online community of practice and our grant making and support system, we build the progressive sector's revenue generation knowledge and skills so that it can amplify a people-powered movement. And so we have 3 main buckets that we focus our work in: achieving justice, realizing democracy, and restoring the environment. What we want to do is grow the rev gen capacity of groups that operate in these 3 spaces, because we view them as some of the most critical work being done right now, and want to make sure that these organizations are resourced and sustainable to levels where they can achieve the large-scale systemic change that we need. And wanted to give a shout out and a thank you to our partners at Resilience Initiative, who are helping to sponsor this and all the Fundraising Fridays. Folks have already been doing it, but if you haven't had a chance to, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, or role. The session is being recorded, as Polly stated before, and this, as well as all previous sessions, will be available on our YouTube channel. The link is there, but Polly can share that in the chat now, and then also at the end of the training today. And what is available, Paul? I think you have some notes on your screen. Great. What's available through the partnership? We can do one-on-one fundraising coaching, which is individualized coaching, consulting, and deliverable preparation. Some of the things that we've worked on with groups in the past include board fundraising trainings, annual development plans, end of year campaign structures and strategy, marketing and fundraising communication calendars, major gift training, etc., as well as these Fundraising Fridays. So this is the first year we're rolling out this new template, where there are kind of 2 tracks. The first one is building on fundraising fundamentals, and the second one, which is today's session, looks at current trends and next level topics that are going on in our field. So please feel free to sign up for the one-on-ones. I know Polly just put the link in the chat for us to be able to continue to support you in the wonderful work you're doing through our coaching and technical assistance program. And if you have any additional questions, you can reach out to Michelle Mengel at the email below. Great. And like I mentioned before, if this ends up being really beneficial for you and you want to go back and see some of the other things that we've talked about in the past, or want to revisit this convo at a later time, feel free to do so on our private YouTube channel. The link is right there. And all the sessions that we've done for Fundraising Fridays will be posted on that channel. Great. So let's talk about maintaining sustainability through a recession. We're going to go through a couple different topics today. We're really going to get a grounding and framing in what we're talking about when it comes to recessions, inflation, what these terms actually mean. We'll talk about some frameworks to help set up your strategies, talk about some tactics, who and what you should be searching out, and look at some tools and trends that are emerging in our industry to combat this. So starting with storm clouds on the horizon, what is a recession? What is inflation? And are we already in a recession? So to begin, just wanted to define some terms, make sure we're all operating on the same wavelength. A lot of these economic terms are being used culturally to mean just not great economic times, but what do they actually mean, and what's the true definition and marker of where we are economically right now and how it affects our work? So the definition of a recession is a prolonged period of economic decline. The most common measure of whether we are currently in a recession or not is 2 consecutive quarters of gross domestic product declining for a country, a region, or whatever size scale you want to measure. Inflation is the rate of price increases over a period of time. So in layman's terms, inflation makes the same products cost more money over time. So the value of each dollar or whatever metric you're using money-wise goes down. But would love to hear, how are you and your donors talking about the recession, talking about inflation? They've been big cultural topics that we've seen in our personal lives, but how is this relating to your work, the fundraising that you're doing, both from individuals and from the institutions that you solicit?
I can imagine these conversations are coming up at the board level, especially.
I think it's interesting that for my board in particular, it's not coming up as much as it should. While you don't want them to be alarmed, you want them to be realistic and adjust expectations, but also in a perfect world, and we had our development committee yesterday, is let's start making plans. What do we want to do differently? What can we add? What should we pull off of our menu? So facilitating those conversations is what I'm working on right now, to make sure that there's a dialogue instead of an echo chamber, which is, one of those pieces that we have to walk that line of helping them feel like there is work to be done and that they can add momentum to the way that they reach out to the community and potential donors, but also to adjust expectations of what the team can pull together alone. I don't think it's hopeless. I think it's an opportunity to add new tools. So that's kind of how I'm addressing it.
For sure. I think that's great. And, one thing that stands out about what you said is getting ahead of that and having true leadership and wanting to have those conversations early rather than, those conversations being uncomfortable and being reactionary conversations. The earlier that you can start planning and prepping for downturns is, when times are still relatively decent or good. You buy the umbrella when it's sunny out, not when it starts raining. Anyone else talking with their donors about the recession or inflation? or just the economy in general?
Is anyone personally freaking out? Or think it's overblown?
Oh, I didn't say I wasn't freaking out, Polly. Come on now. You got to freak on the inside or lonely friends.
I love your honesty.
But I'm also perpetually freaking out. So that's just kind of how I roll. That's why I'm good at what I do.
Respect.
All right, so let's talk about where we actually are as compared to what we're hearing in the news, in common conversation. We currently are not in a recession. The US economy has grown by 2.9% in Q4, so at the end of 2022, and 1.1% in Q1 of 2023. Not the best numbers in the world, but ones that show growth rather than decline. But even though we aren't technically in a recession, that doesn't mean that people don't feel like we are. So there's a difference between the actual reality and the perceived reality. So are you seeing signs in your conversations with donors that you are facing economic uncertainty? Are you seeing donors starting to pull back or shift priorities? Are gifts getting smaller, or longtime donors potentially cycling off their donation cycles?
Is anybody noticing that the cost of doing business is increasing? Are you seeing any effects internally?
Alex, were you raising your hand?
Oh, yeah, I was just seeing some more cautiousness, I would say, from funders and some, well, we had to focus on the basics but I don't, some of that I don't buy. I think it's just a smokescreen.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the real cause for that then?
I mean, yeah, I think it's more the nervousness around the finances rather than the actual finances.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm just speculating.
No, that's a real thing. So there's a difference between the actual state of the economy and how people feel about the economy. And folks' feelings are going to really dictate their actions rather than what you tell them is happening, right? These numbers obviously show that the economy is still growing, even though at a slower rate than normal. But all we've been hearing in the news, all people are talking about, is how much more everything costs, tightening belts, not spending as much. So there is that disconnect there. And so I think you're spot on with that analysis. So let's talk about the inflation rate. These numbers are from the US government. So in April, the inflation rate was 4.9%. And so this is year over year. So compared to April 2022, things cost 4.9% as more than they did at that point last year. And that's down from a high of 9.1% in June of 2022 as compared to June of 2021. So inflation is coming down in a technical sense, but like culturally, feelings wise, like to your point, Alex, some of that damage may have already been done. Like, prices are high across the board on certain things. And people are really feeling that economic crunch, especially like small dollar donors. So we've been seeing trends of like, although there are more people giving, the size of the gifts are going down. And what that might speak to is that tightening of the belt. So whereas people had more discretionary income, the year before, like last year before last, they still want to give, but now that $50 gift might be $35, or, you know, and that trickle down effect as you move down the gift table. Are you seeing that across any of your small dollar donors? Are you seeing giving go down, increase, maybe in some spaces? Or have there been like just general shifts over the past year that you've noticed?
Come on, I saw caffeine, I saw coffee cups.
Yes. Hi there.
Hi. Can you pronounce your name, please? I want to make sure I say it right.
Absolutely, Yardina.
Yardina. Great. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing?
We're seeing larger individual donations go down. I've originally assumed that maybe it wasn't the economy because of some of the trauma that happened in 2020 with COVID and discrimination and murder of Black people, as well as an Asian community. I figured we were just in a season of more open hearts, translating to open support in terms of financial. So we've seen that the individual donations go down basically by the end of 2021. Not institutional, not private foundations, not government, but the private donors. And that's what I just originally attributed to.
Yeah. That's a very good insight too. 2024, a lot of the general public was their first introduction, we'll say, into being a small dollar donor. A lot of people felt motivated to give to multiple causes that year. And so there is going to be a natural shrinking of that donor base as time goes on. So there's like I wouldn't say that it's one or the other. I think that right now we're just in a perfect storm of a conflux of different influences that are affecting donor trends. So I think that analysis is definitely spot on. So there might be like multiple factors affecting small dollar donors and why people are giving and at what amounts.
I think what keeps coming to me is like folks getting worried because the storm clouds on the horizon and holding on, especially when you think like international economy. I know yesterday I read an article about Argentina's economy and their inflation is just continuing to skyrocket. And I think I personally, and then I wonder about like donors, just feel like it's inevitable that will come to like us in the US. And so it's like, that's all the more reason for me to try to hold on to my pennies, my dollars right now, while I have more flexible income, but yet I don't know what it will look like in 6 months or in 12 months.
For sure. I mean, that's part of like the effect of the news cycle on people's habits and so no one wants to be the person holding the bag, right? So you see something happening over there, then it starts creating tighter wallets like by choice, which then restricts the economy and then makes like what we thought was real actually real later on down the road, which makes people like tighten up their wallet, right? So that's honestly some of the financial thinking behind what the Fed does. So when you raise interest rates, not to get all economics here, but when you raise interest rates, it makes it more expensive to borrow money, which makes people spend less. And so you slow down the economy. That's the thinking, at least, but yeah.
Yeah, we even talked about that a bit last year because, there was all this talk at the end at the beginning of the fall, if you remember, like the same doom and gloom was being projected. And, Bethany did a presentation back then about it. Like, you look at it on paper, just like Kafuli has here, you look at it on paper and we're not where people say that we are. But if you create enough panic, people are going to withhold their dollars, or they're going to feel like, they're going to scroll it away. And remember, the biggest donating block tend to be people over 65 that, when you look demographically, well, people over 65 had lived through a lot of economic turmoil. So, they hear these predictions and they think this is a real thing coming. So I need to scroll it away. But the last couple of times people have, projected all this doom and gloom, it didn't happen. Now, it wasn't that long ago that we had some hard times. Financially, the pandemic was hard on a lot of people. But economic downturn, like countrywide, hitting the economy like in a persistent way, it's been a minute. But that fear mongering is happening a lot. And I think it is, from what I'm hearing from our grantees and folks on the ground, that's really affecting folks is, like they're not making their biggest gifts right now. They're holding on, they're giving a little more slowly, just in case.
Yeah. And so, some of it is too, I know I might be dating myself, but I remember, 2007 and, the Great Recession and hearing about banks closing. And that was like the first time I was old enough to like really recognize an event like that. And then hearing about banks closing, over the past couple months, like my brain immediately shot back to that, the feelings that were felt, what I remembered about that time, even not really fully being an adult and understanding, but like, so that in and of itself influences my personal choices of like economic decisions. And I wasn't even like a real member of the economy at that time. I was a teenager. So, those things are real for people. And so we need to be able to frame our work and our strategies to help combat some of that, and ensure that our donors, stick with us. Jennifer said in the chat, they haven't seen a decline in regular donors, but haven't gotten many new donors. And that's something that we've been hearing as well. New donor acquisition for groups has been really hard, and some lists are feeling kind of burnt out. But it's good to see that like you've been able to retain donors, which is like honestly the most important part. Once they're in, you really want to focus on keeping them because it's easier to do that than it is to like find brand new ones. So still doing a good job over there. Great. So let's jump in and talk to like, now that we've defined where we are, how do we support our work? And how do we frame our work and the strategies that we'll use and talk about going forward to help sustain our organization through tough times? And it really comes down to, I think Kirsten, you may have said it before about like showing leadership in these times and like going to the board and being proactive about the work that you're doing to prepare for this. Because you, as the professional, people are looking to you for guidance on what we should do. As development professionals, like we are responsible for making sure that everyone still has jobs, still is able to pay their bills, right? That's the added burden of the work that we do. And so panic may be everywhere else in the news and in general conversation, but it can't be here. You can't let the news, what you're hearing culturally, agitate us in our work into a state of panic, and let that sink into your messaging towards donors. Employees are still looking to you for calm. We know that, the economy hasn't been the best. We're seeing that across the board in demand for services from nonprofit organizations, whether that's direct service work or advocacy work. We're we're seeing heightened demand for structural change in many ways. And it's on us to be able to provide that. And even though times are difficult, we need to still believe and show that we can effectively achieve our mission and the work that we want to do. And that's the message that we should be sharing internally to staff and externally to donors as well. And then also really having an abundance mindset, which is the most difficult thing to do in general in this work, but especially during times where it's feeling like money is tight. You know, the work that we do really requires imagination, and the thing that having a scarcity mindset does, first of all, is rob you of that imagination, because now you're just working towards a bottom line, and you're in a race against time at that point. It'll prevent you from investing in things that later on down the road will make your job so much easier and bring in totally new revenue forms, because you're like, well, we don't have the time to invest in an individual giving program. I just need to write grants. I need to see these big numbers come through the door, right? And that panic will cause you to shift your own strategy and your team strategy. But now it's not the time to play it safe. If anything, now is the time to invest in these new different forms of revenue generation that's going to provide your org the diversification of funding sources that's going to make it more resilient against stuff like this, so that if a big donor drops, if one arm of your fundraising goes down or shrinks, you have different forms of bringing in money that is going to help hedge against that.
I need to say an amen right here. This is something that I hear a lot, like over my whole career and consulting career, the whole freaking 3 decades of it, that when organizations feel panicked about like revenue, rather than take a chance and invest in themselves and their own professional development, or invest in their work trying to do something new, they just stick to what is comfortable. The problem is that what has been comfortable hasn't paid all the bills, hasn't allowed you to grow, hasn't allowed you to do the things that you need to do. And if you pull back on that investment and trying new strategies, by the time you feel safe enough to make that investment, you may have already been impacted by not being nimble and not being flexible with the way that you're raising money, and you'll be even more set in your ways because more time has gone by, and you lean on that maybe grant writing crutch, or maybe it's special events crutch, or whatever is that it's a helpful tool. Crutches are useful tools; they're not bad things, but like, there are also other tools out there that could be useful. But so, it might make you feel comfortable and keep your anxiety down to stay in your safe zone. It might not be what's best organizationally at the moment.
Yeah.
So I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, that's super real, Polly. And I think for all of us too, who are development professionals, I know in my career working at nonprofits, it was very much, you're walking into a house that's already been built, right, in a lot of spaces. So if your org has done special events in the past or has a gala, right, you're doing the gala, no matter what, like you say, or what you want to do. Like, there is a gala to be done, or if it's individual giving, grant writing, whatever the case is. And so it's easy to roll with it when it makes the money and has been proven to be successful. But now when it's time to like really be creative and imaginative, oftentimes, orgs will feel this pressure to lean on what's been successful in the past. So just wanted to open up the floor a bit and talk about that scarcity mindset from a development standpoint, from a fundraising standpoint. Do you feel that in general at all in your work? Are you feeling it especially more now with this economic uncertainty around? And what are some maybe strategies that you've used in the past to combat that?
I'd also love to hear if folks are thinking about but haven't quite done it yet.
Mhm.
I think the organization I work for, Soul Force, is very good at staying oriented to the abundance mindset, as we try to communicate to funders the importance of the mission and not the dollar that they're putting into it. I personally struggle with a scarcity mindset, but I think my team does it well, just to add some context here.
I'd love to hear a little bit more, Maggie, if you don't mind, like what do you think is your struggle? Is it like there's only but so much pie? Is it, what is the thing for you?
Yeah, I think there's only so much pie, and I don't want to be the one that doesn't get the slice, or I don't want to have the slice and the person next to me doesn't have the slice. And like, it's just everything about there being limited resources, when in actuality there is not, because our government is like trillions of dollars in debt. And so I saw this meme that was like, they're $1 trillion in debt and they want to give me a credit score, like WTF. And I was like, that is real. Feel that. Yeah.
I really appreciate you saying that out loud, because I do think that it is something that is common, right? Us, as fundraisers, we are like, I can't tell you how many times have had conversations where like, I don't, with a fellow fundraiser and been like talking about prospects or something. And I don't want to name somebody that gives to me because I don't want them to steal them, or worry, like, so. And I think that those are absolutely real conversations that we need to have with each other and just sort of like be real about it. And also remind each other, every donor gives to 5 to 7 organizations. They can love me and they can love my friend's organization, and I've built stronger donor relationships personally when I've been like, oh, hey, John, I know that you're really into this thing. I saw this great org you might want to check out. They, like, it didn't hurt my relationship with the donor. They actually saw it as like a relationship building thing. Like we got strong, like I saw them as a person. And so like, I think that we need to sort of like figure out where's that coming from. I'm so like, thank you for saying that out loud. And then like, just sort of like internally interrogate, like, where's that coming from? I need to remove myself, my money issues, my fears and insecurities out of the conversation. If I want my organization to have an abundant mindset, I'm going to fake it until I actually get there.
100%. And I think part of that is like, speaks to even just like the limiting nature subconsciously of the scarcity mindset. Like we're all doing this work to enact change in the world, right? So at the end of the day, whether it's our organization, me personally, another organization that like gets the final win, like we were all part of this, right? But that fear of like that $20 going somewhere else from like a donor and not wanting to share that, and you need to like hoard it for yourself and for your org and for your work and for your security, right? That removes us away from the mission of the work and why we do this in the first place. So it's always good to just like think through the framing of that, and really deconstruct like what is causing the scarcity mindset within me, and how do I combat that in myself and in my work, to be the best fundraiser I can be and to like promote as much change as I can. And, taking it macro scale, now I'm not going to get on a super pro-America rant, but statistically speaking, this is the largest, strongest economy in the world in human history. So technically, this is the easiest time there has ever been to have our job. there's more dollars out there than there's ever been, yet we feel so like shrunk by our position and that there's not enough out there. But there's so many people who have yet to be like activated, who have yet to be brought into donor pools, so many orgs that are coming up to trying to solve new problems. So we really need to like just look at the world around us again, separating that reality from those feelings that you have, and being able to like really analyze what's going on. So yeah, to the next point, communication first is the framework that you really need to have here, because as we said, this is not an isolated problem in just like it's affecting nonprofit organizations, it's affecting people, it's affecting your staff, your board, your donors, you know, foundations, individuals. Like we said before, a lot of major individual donors are older folks who have a lot of their money tied up in the stock market. How the stock market goes literally affects how people feel about their ability to give and to donate. And the same thing with foundations. A lot of endowments are housed in the stock market, and that affects the amount of money that they're willing to give in any given year. So being able to communicate that with your donors and network in a proactive way sometimes is helpful. Alex, I see that you made a note that you haven't talked to your donors or network about the economy at all. Is that like a conscious choice, or you just like, you know, we don't really frame our conversations that way, or is it like a kind of avoidant, like we don't want to talk about it kind of situation?
It's not a conscious choice. It's not something that comes up in our work that much. And I just didn't perceive it as a a part of the decision-making process for our donors.
That makes sense. Each donor base is different, so it may be that like some of the folks who you solicit may not be as open, like talking about it or be feeling the effects yet. So it's definitely something that you can take different parts and pieces of this and frame it around like how you want to message your to your folks as you solicit.
I could be wrong. I could be totally off on this.
The other part of the communication first thing is if your organization is seeing a donation downturn, like a lot of groups are seeing, they might have more donors, but they're getting less money, or there's less donors, but maybe staying at the same level, which will, you know, if that happens, you're going to start to see attrition at some point, right? It is important to communicate honestly about where the organization is financially. Now, I'm not suggesting you do what like during political fundraising season happens, where everybody's like, help us meet this deadline by midnight tonight. And that deadline happens every quarter, because every quarter they've got to file, and every quarter there's an emergency need for money. I'm not suggesting creating an emergency where one is not real. But talking about finances of the organization, or being honest about where you are in your fundraising, actually does help you build better better relationships with your constituents, not just donors. I can't tell you how many times, and I've seen several in my career, seen several organizations close. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from donors to those organizations say, if I only knew they were struggling, I would have given more. And so, you know, don't wait until like it's too late to make an impact. You can normalize talking about money. You can normalize talking about the economic effects on your organization, and that when people get nervous about their own money, how that affects the organization's ability to grow. And so like, that's why I've always felt like annual reports were good. I know they were coming out of favor, but it gives you an opportunity to be like, you know, like let's talk about what's different this year over last year from a fundraising perspective, because you always talk about your programmatic stuff, but your annual report was typically the only place where you had that one page, maybe even one paragraph on one page where you talked about the money. They gave you an opportunity to be like, we're hugely grateful for the support we've got. It wasn't as great as last year, and we really need support. It gives you the entree to have that conversation. So I'm not really saying like, don't ring the bell if the bell doesn't need to be rung, but if you start talking about it early, maybe you don't need to.
Alex had a note, and I've heard this a lot too. Alex said, I had a fundraising consultant tell me not to show any vulnerability, as it can scare donors into thinking the ship is sinking, and stay positive 100%. Yeah, that's I guess there's like two schools of thought around it is the way that I would say that. I think though, especially with small dollar donors, they're already invested in you and your org and your mission. I think that sometimes with institutional funders, those conversations can be a little bit trickier just because the amounts are bigger, there's more on the line, reporting, all of that. For long-term small dollar donors, I think there is a possibility of having like more frank conversations, especially if you engage in like deep level stewardship, like actual conversations with some of your major donors and not just like written solicitations and things of that nature. Kirsten, I see a hand up.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you. And I just wanted to speak to that because that is what so much of so many folks who have wonderful consultants who do great work for them. Thinking about the being able, you can be positive. I just want to offer support because I did just have this conversation and I'm going to be having it again on Monday. There are ways to present information that is challenging, that if you have some ideas of how you're going to adjust your sales to meet those winds that are blowing in a direction that's a little bit different than you would originally hope for, if you have those in your hip pocket when you have the conversations, so that you feel sturdy in your planning, even if you haven't completely got it dialed, but the elements that you want to add, then I think that you can have those conversations with either key donors or even your smaller, hopefully monthly reoccurring donors. Like, man, if you could up this, $5 a month this time, and you do that times 400 people, then you're getting some of that incremental revenue coming back for you. And I just want to offer you support because we've been through floods and fires where I am, and lots of natural disasters, and had to do a lot of that adjusting of our expectations and coming up with our plans while we keep our board comfortable with the fact that we're going to hit those hard targets. So when you're doing the institutional applications, absolutely wanting to have that fiscal stability is paramount, but I think that we can hold both at the same time. But maybe I'm being idealistic.
I don't think that you are. So I came to the notion, and you don't have to ascribe to this theory, that the mindset of like, we have to keep our best face forward and not show any weakness around money is a product of white supremacist patriarchal constructions that are part of the nonprofit industrial complex. And that if we want to if we want to stop playing in that field and in playing that game and play the game differently, that means showing up fully as the types of groups that we are. Now, you also you have to be strategic too. If you're going to be meeting with a big giant foundation that is the like epitome of the nonprofit industrial complex, I would probably be cautious about how I would present any bad news. I would be looking at a way to talk about the strengths or the pivots or the ways that I'm going to deal with it. But I think when you're talking about talking to the folks about what's going on, I think it just shows more credibility to be as frank and honest as possible. And we're not going to change the machine unless we all start doing different.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think also, sometimes like we can't like take the donor's intelligence for granted too, right? If if we didn't need money, we wouldn't ask you for money. So like at the end of the day, we obviously are whatever you can give, I'm talking to you so you can give it, right? So if I need more, I should be able to reflect what I need and why I need it in an open and frank conversation. Whether you're able to give it or not, that's your choice and your decision. But it's almost like if you don't segment your donor list and you ask everybody for $20, right? Some people have the capacity to give way more than 20. Some people have the capacity to give way less than 20. And you're just going to cut all those folks out of your giving tree because you haven't tailored it, right? So we should, they're difficult conversations and they're not easy, but we should definitely open ourselves up and build trust within our donor base that they're actually supporters and not just the financial backing of our endeavors, right? So bring them into the fold. This is also a stewardship conversation, also a programming conversation of like what we're doing with your investment into our organization.
And now we all get t-shirts that say, I wouldn't ask for money if I didn't need money, right? Because I want those to wear to every meeting. Perhaps a button, a little more subtle, but I'm thinking that may be like the graduation gift for everyone who moves forward with this work. Thank you for offering that.
That's a great idea. We'll start up a merch store and we'll have that good to go by our next fundraising Friday.
That is an absolutely undeveloped revenue stream for y'all, right? I just
See, even us, we still have room to grow and to learn.
All right, did we beat this dead horse enough or
Yeah, I think so. We can
right.
to the next slide. Great. So here I just wanted to talk about like macro versus micro, and how these conversations that we just talked about are affecting people on an individual level. We've gotten to a lot of this in our previous conversation, so we don't have to sit here too long, but just wanted to highlight we're talking about the struggles that we're facing as resourced organizations with multiple people, multiple ways of bringing in money, especially for our smaller donors. They have less resources at their disposal. Things are more expensive than they were before. So they're really mentally feeling that pinch. So the first part we've definitely talked about, the first question of how has economic uncertainty affected your constituent base. But the second one I'd like to really sit with, and this is where we have control over what we do as organizations, right? How have you adjusted your programming and your offerings as a fundraising department to support both the constituents and your donors in this new environment? So for your lapsed donors who are like, I love this org, but I can't afford to give anymore, what offerings are you giving them to keep them engaged, right? That's a huge stewardship touch. They'll be much more likely if they have volunteer opportunities or ways of continuing to remain with your organization in spirit or in effort. And when their economic situation changes, maybe even increase their donation from where it was in the past, rather than, a lapsed donor just becomes a lapsed donor. You don't talk to them anymore. And so the relationship that was built is shown to be truly only transactional, right? So are there different strategies that you've used internally or thoughts around what you can do organizationally to really keep people in the fold and make sure that financial support isn't the only form of support that your donor base can offer your org? Kirsten, is that the same hand up from before, or do you have another thought?
I think I'm just gonna leave it up as my amen hand. I'm sorry, I thought I.
Yeah, this time is also for y'all, so happy to think through some ideas about what y'all can do with your own donor bases and constituent bases as well around this work. Or just even talking about how you view lapsed donors currently, and if there are things that you'd love to change about that.
I would love to hear from folks when do you consider a donor lapsed to the point where you either reduce or stop communicating with them? Is it 18 months? Is it less than 18 months? Is it 2 years, 3 years?
I mean, for us, lapsed donors stay on our listserv, so we're communicating with them usually in some form or fashion unless they remove themselves. So, is it a personal connection? Often not, but it can be. But it's not as standardized as it should or needs to be.
Are the communications that they receive very different? Like, if you're not soliciting them, okay, they're not going to get the solicitation. But is it less content rich? Is there any other way that it's different?
No, it's not for us. But we're a tiny organization, so it's hard to stratify communications. But we certainly could, and it's something we need to work on. It's part of why we're here with y'all. Gain your wisdom.
Totally get that. Yeah. Stratified communication can definitely be difficult in figuring out who to target. But something that once you make that initial investment, it becomes easier over time because your systems will be already built around it. But we can definitely continue to talk about that. Should we jump to the next one? Okay, cool. So let's talk about tactics. Like, what can we do to make our orgs more resilient? So as we said before, keeping your donors is number one. You want to lower your attrition rate as much as possible. Keeping your donors requires the least amount of effort, least amount of money, and it's the easiest to do. So speak to your base, figure out what they need, how to keep them involved, how to keep them engaged. You want to cut off as much attrition as possible. Move your donors. If you have long-term donors, try and convert them into giving either at a higher level or giving a recurring gift. A recurring gift also is a great hedge against uncertain economic times. Say, for instance, you have a donor who is a major donor. They give somewhere between the $500 to $1,000 range every year, right? Let's say they give $1,000 every year, make it a nice even number. Times are hard. It's the end of year, just pay for Christmas, looking at New Year's. I don't think I could swing $1,000. I don't have $1,000 to give this year, right? If you talk to them, you're like, we'd love to have you be an inaugural member of our recurring giving program. Make them feel special, make them feel good. Ask them to give $100 a month. $100 a month for $1,000 donor is much more palpable. And you're going to get $1,200 over the course of the year. So you've increased their gift by $200 while simultaneously making it much easier for them to give. Right? And now imagine that across all of your major donors. That also helps you affect your cash flow. Instead of waiting till the end of the year and you're closing your books and praying like your individual giving end of year campaign goes good, You'll have a much steadier stream of cash flow throughout the year, which will help you manage expectations, plan better budgets, be able to form your programming around the actual cash that you'll have on hand, rather than be susceptible to like really high ebbs and flows, depending on how those campaigns go. The next thing is putting your board to work. We spoke a little bit about this before, but that's what boards are for. During times of uncertainty, you really want to lean on their expertise, their networks, ask them to contribute, ask them to fundraise and invest in your organization, and think of different ways to get board members involved. You know, traditional boards used to be like pretty strictly only high wealth individuals, but we've seen that shift for a lot of organizations. There are tons of ways that you know, working class folks who sit on boards are able to you know, fulfill their board duties even if they can't give massive checks, whether that's hosting a little fundraiser on the side for the organization, doing some volunteer work, opening up their connections to the organization for like cross building and cross learning. There are tons of ways to get folks involved that like will lead to dollars down the road, and helps them fulfill their board duties. So again, be creative, think of different ways and different tools and skill sets that your board members have that you can lean on. And as I said before, recurring giving is key. You know, donors are giving smaller one-time gifts now. But if you're able to get them on that recurring giving track, it eases their financial burden and actually allows them to give more money to the organization over the course of time, and all the cash flow things that I spoke about previously. Another thing that we don't do enough of is collaborate around money. There are so many like-minded orgs that we work with in coalition for programming, but we never collaborate around money. Partner with your allies, do joint fundraisers. It'll expose your organization to a whole new donor base that you didn't have access to. So imagine a list of a like-minded organization may have thousands of folks who never heard of you before, but they know you now. It expands your reach. And it builds, you know, closer ties with allied organizations, and that will spread over into your programming that you do work with them for anyway. So there's really a win-win situation there. Talking to your donors. Social media is such an incredible tool to be able to speak openly with the folks who are supporting your organization. You know, you get to directly communicate with them, directly impact them in real time, and in a way that is personal, and removes the cost barrier for communication. So if you think about it, traditionally it was only you know, snail mail, and then we got email campaigns and all of those things. If someone sends you a message on Facebook, comments on your Instagram, tweets at you, you can reply back in seconds, build an instant connection with that person, and it costs zero money. It just took a little bit of time, right? So investing in that really invests in building those bridges between your organization and your donors. It's so much harder to replicate the amount of connective tissue that builds through other forms of communication in the same amount of time. One flag though, and we kind of talked about this before, is avoiding the emergency solicitation. Speak from a position of strength. We are fundraising, we're not begging, right? So this is an investment in your organization, and you should continue to portray yourself that way. Like we said, there are times where you can be frank about, you know, the situation that your org is facing, but you still want people to believe that this is a trustworthy organization that's doing great work and a great place for you to not put your money, but invest in, because it's doing amazing work. And finally, diversification is key. you know, I can't tell you how many places that I've worked or consulted at that you know, they have their bread and butter, one big grant or 5 major donors, right? And then if you ask them, all right, so what happens when they stop giving? And it's crickets in the room, you know, because no one wants to talk about it. Everyone's thought about it, but no one wants to talk about what happens when that happens. And as we said before, buy the umbrella now, diversify now while you still have the chance to before you're forced to, right? You can't depend on any one donor source forever. So dibble and dabble. It's worth the investment. By the time you'll need that investment, your systems will already be built and you won't be scrambling. So if that's the one piece of advice I could give today, diversify, diversify, diversify. Okay. So now let's talk about who and what. Who are we going to target? How are we going to target them? So for major donors, what we really want to do is establish the top of your giving pyramid and reinforce recurring giving. As we talked before, ease that initial burden of how big the initial gift is, make up your money on the back end, even out your cash flow. That's what we want to do. So have those conversations, make those phone calls, send those emails, try and get folks on a recurring giving program. They're relatively easy to set up. If you don't have one or don't have one that's marketed, you can always convert your current recurring giving program into a marketed one, give different names for tier levels, make people feel special, get invited to be a founding member of this thing, make them feel like they're investing in the bedrock of the organization, which they are. Board members, establish a give-get, but not the hard traditional give-get that we talked about. There's so much value in effort and in sweat equity. Think creatively about what a give and a get could be for board members who don't have, you know, thousands of dollars to donate on their own. Encourage them to speak about the organization, increase your profile in different circles that you haven't met before, and make spreading the word a prerequisite to be a board member. Oftentimes, we judge board members solely on their financial contribution. How many times have you talked about our organization in different spaces? How many people have you introduced to us? Not even just to the donor base, but to our comms list, to our newsletter. All those things eventually turn into gifts, but we never put any emphasis on that because we can't see the initial dollar. Invest in those conversations. So for new small dollar donors, establish a relationship with them. Ask them why they were excited to give and how to get involved beyond donating. So that goes into like what we're talking about with the lapsed donors. Now that they've given their gift, you want to make sure that you're keeping them. Give them a reason to feel connected to the actual work that your organization is doing. And they're much more likely to give in the future. And for current small dollar donors, encourage them to join the recurring giving program as well. Highlight how beneficial they've been to the organization, what their money has been able to do and to provide. One thing that is, you know, tried and true in our industry is like the feed the children model. $1 a day, you know, feeds this kid. Look at their giving history. You know, people might think that their $10, $20 donation didn't really mean much, but if they've done it for a number of years, peg it to something. Help them show, you know, your donations over this course of time allowed our organization to do X, Y, Z. Put that mental picture of them directly putting input into your organization and the work that you're doing. Ally organizations, plan joint fundraisers to reach new donors. This is an investment not only in building solidarity with organizations that are like-minded and to embrace that abundance mindset, but to open yourself up to a brand new donor list that you may not have had access to in the past in a very cost-effective way. Campaigns and events. Make big pushes around programming, end of year, and constituent specific dates and times. A lot of us do this, but there's so much more that we can do beyond just Giving Tuesday, end of year, those type of things. Think about deep deep things about your constituency base and even your donor base, if those aren't the same thing, and how best to target folks with solicitation. So for instance, there's a group, Georgia Muslim Voter Project, that frames what would traditionally be their end of year giving around the holy month of Ramadan, because that's when, for their constituent base, a lot of giving is based. And so that transition for them has accounted in an increase in small dollar donors that they probably wouldn't have been able to achieve if they just stuck with the regular calendar. So think about who you speak to and what dates are important to them and how to connect deeper with those communities. And then seeking out alternative funding sources. There are so many different ways that you can bring in dollars. We've talked about diversification before, and some of what that looks like would be legacy donations, tribute or memorial donations, stock donations, in-kind donations that can support like your work. If you're open to them, cryptocurrency donations, there are tons of different ways and avenues that you can receive funds that are outside of just your traditional individual giving program.
And earned income there is a good one there too. So there are so many groups that we've worked with that have like a training program where they, where that's just part of their programmatic work, and they see it as like, this is what they're doing for the community. Well, that's awesome. But there's also probably folks who would be willing to pay for that training. Is there a way for you to be able to accomplish your mission and create revenue for the organization at the same time? Do you have thought leadership in an area that other folks would pay for that time? I know lots of organizations, and it's happened to me as a professional fundraiser, who want to, like take me out for coffee to pick my brain. And, I spend 3 hours with them and I get a $5 cup of coffee out of it. Like I'm happy to share my knowledge with my peeps, but, think about it organizationally. How often does your organization get tapped for expertise from a partner where you could say, I'd love to give you those resources. Can we do this as a consultancy? We can do it as a sliding scale, so it's fair to you. But, this is also, emotional and actual intellectual labor, and that should be treated equitably too. So those can be tough conversations to have as well, but you frame it in the right way and folks go like, oh, dude, of course. And now you've got an avenue to not only raise your reputation, but also raise income.
100%. There any thoughts or questions about this targeted fundraising, or even some of the strategies that we had talked about in the previous section?
Alex, I see that you said that you like the idea of joint fundraising. Was that something that you just hadn't thought of before, or what turned you on about it?
A passing thought. I may not have an abundance mindset when it comes to fundraising. This is a little bit to your point, Meg, but I do have an abundance mindset when it comes to partnerships around programmatic. And I do sort of, shift thinking. Whereas I do have that feeling of, oh gosh, should I talk to my colleagues about our donors? I definitely think, hey, we should talk about our work and how we work together. So it just feels like the right thing to do I love the cross-pollination of donors concept. I love supporting other organizations and thinking about how to lift them up. So it just makes a lot of sense. I don't know that organizations would think of it, and I've thought about it in passing before, but never in like, no, we should actively do this. And I think it's a rad idea.
Great. Well, so glad that you're able to walk out of here with that idea, and hopefully we'll get an invite to your joint fundraiser in a couple.
Yeah, y'all come on out.
Great. So let's talk about some tools and trends and what we're seeing in the field right now. So this data has come from the M&R benchmarks. Their tasting menu. It's top line trends for fundraising based on 215 nonprofits across the country, different focus areas, different sizes. So I just pulled out some facts that I think were relevant for this conversation, and would just love to get your thoughts on how those may potentially relate to you, your work, and what you've been seeing in this current economic era that we're going through. So average online revenue actually declined by 4% last year, and revenue from one-time online giving decreased by 12%. However, revenue from monthly giving increased by 11% and accounted for 28% of all online revenue. So as we were talking about before, moving those donors from one-time donors to monthly recurring donors is happening as like an overall trend. Those percentages are almost matched there. Digital ad investment by nonprofits increased by 28%. And Given Tuesday revenue declined by 13%. So again, it's hard to stand out sometimes when you're like in the mix and every other nonprofit is emailing, asking for donations at the same time. Thinking about when are good other times for you to potentially run your giving campaigns and speak to your community at times that are more important to them. And this last one I thought was like super interesting. 56% of emails were direct fundraising asks, but only 26% were about branding awareness or program education. So we are asking folks for their money more than twice as much as we're like telling them who we are and what we do. I think that we need to develop larger conversations with our donors about why they're important and what our work is, rather than, inundating them with asks all the time. And I would love to learn from you all if you have any idea what that ratio is like for your organizations and how you speak to your folks. And then we have some more benchmarks on the next slide. So for organizations, it was more expensive for small nonprofits to digitally organize through every single other avenue except social media. So as we were saying before, using socials is something that you should do to your advantage and be able to speak with your donor base directly. Mailings, even emails through email service like MailChimp, all of those factors were multiple percentage points more expensive the smaller your organization was. And then finally, peer-to-peer text message fundraising has exploded as a way to raise money and mobilize for advocacy actions. So this is not only a fundraising tool, but it's also a programming tool depending on what type of work your organization does. Having peer-to-peer text messaging allows people to just hop on their phone, make a really quick donation if they're interested in supporting the organization. But also if you're like, hey, we're doing a march down at City Hall or whatever the case is, you can reach your entire base live on their phones and folks can show up and pull up for you. So yeah, just wanted to offer those tidbits at the end and wanted to hear from you all. Are any of those numbers shocking to you? Does anything stand out? And what do you think in relation to the general average that we're seeing in these benchmarks? Where do your organizations reside, and are there certain things that you'd be interested in changing and improving.
I have to hop off, but I want to give a big thank you for the information today. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
We used a newer, I think was newer tactic in one of our recent online fundraising campaigns when we knew we were going to be sending more emails to our base that were specific to asks. And we did like, click here to remove yourself from these fundraising emails that will be happening over the next 6 weeks. And like, you'll still like receive our programming updates, but you can opt out of these fundraising messages if you want. And I was grateful that our fundraising head and comms folks decided to do that, because I wonder if like people are just tired of being asked, like you've kind of said throughout the process, and does that lead into them not wanting to donate to anyone?
Do you have any insight on like how many folks opted out of those fundraising emails per chance or no?
I don't, but I can maybe bring it back next time.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd really be interested to see what those numbers are.
Yeah, and I think it would be a great task for me to do, just to inform our next fundraising campaign. Do we want to do this again, or did like nobody opt out, so maybe they are interested in hearing all this?
Yeah.
I think it's really important to have multi-level opt-outs, because what I see happening a lot is, folks they don't want to be asked all the time, so they'll unsubscribe and they don't realize they're unsubscribing from everything, or maybe they don't want your newsletter, but they want everything else. So, I would make sure that just like the shops, all corporations do, when you hit the unsubscribe button, they're like, do you just want to miss out on getting the coupons, or do you want to miss out on everything? And giving folks options will then let you change the way you deal with them. The other thing that I have found useful is when I do the unsubscribes, I also give folks an opportunity to say like, how about you just get fewer fundraising emails from us, and we'll just hit you up during our end of the year campaign. And donors tended to like that. But I was really interested in this stat when I read it about about how people were how much email was going out that was solicitation related, and it made me just sort of wonder if it has a lot to do with like that people, it's just like, we need more money, so ask again, and they're not thinking about the tool. They're using the tool as a fundraising tool and not using the tool as a communication tool and a relationship building tool. I mean, if you ran let's say your major donor program that way, you would not have a successful major donor program, right? If you only talk to your major donors when you needed money from them, you would soon run out of major donors, because they would be like, this relationship is fully transactional. I once cared about your mission, but you don't treat people right, so I'm not going to talk to you anymore. Right. So I wonder how much of this it's not necessarily a bad piece of information, because I think it might cause folks to like gut check, am I doing enough relationship building using my communication tools?
And to just carry or piggyback on that, I think it's harder to get a gauge of our donors because everything is virtual now, essentially. So like when you don't hear from donors, it's like, are they interested? Like, do they want this programming email, or do they just want to not hear from us? They'll write their check once a year, and like, that's ideal. I imagine prior to COVID, or I don't know, at different iterations of life, you were meeting donors in person and like getting those like soft interactions and like nonverbal cues to understand like what they're actually looking for from you and from the org a little bit more clearly.
Yeah, I think that that is true, that certainly did happen. But just because, uh, just because we maybe have slowed down that activity doesn't mean we have to stop it. What these tools do is allow us also to sort of like be more generous with the opportunity to have a three-way, a two-way conversation, create like create more interactive things like a 1 or 2 question survey. I want to know something about you. Here's this two question survey as a way to interact with folks. Like what did you, if you put out a report, like maybe a couple of days later, what was the part of the report that struck you most? And you can list maybe the chapters of the report that you, and let folks pick. So you can now, you don't have to just have like the wealthy major donors do information. Now you can get more information from all of your donors by using these tools. So just, like think about like, what would I do if I was sitting across the table with this donor? What kinds of questions would I ask? How would I try to build that relationship? How can I use the tools that I have today to do that on a bigger scale?
That's helpful. Thank you.
Great. So in our last few minutes, just wanted to open up the floor for any thoughts, questions, or comments. Yeah. If none, then please join us on June 9th for our next fundraising Friday, knowing your donor base. So we'll do a deep dive on how to figure out who is giving you money, where to get that data from, how to speak to them better, and how to empower them to help support your org and your work. So really hope to see you there. If you all have any follow-ups, please feel free to email either Polly, myself, or Bethany, and we'd really appreciate your feedback. Polly, if you could drop the link to the feedback survey.
It's already in the chat.
See, 10 steps ahead of me. But yeah, thank you all for joining. It's been great talking with you all and learning more about your work, and hope this was helpful, and looking forward to seeing you all on the 9th.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good weekend.
Bye.